Jake Turner sat in the transfer shuttle, watching the stars blur past, and wondered how his career had gone so spectacularly wrong. 3 months ago, he'd been a promising junior keeper at the Centauri Wildlife Preserve. Now he was being shipped off to the furthest corner of known space because he'd accidentally poisoned Ambassador Threll's prized singing creatures with what he thought was harmless Earth moss. Turns out, harmless to humans doesn't mean harmless to everything else in the galaxy. The shuttle docked at Draken Prime Conservation Station with a metallic clang that echoed through the cramped passenger bay. Jake grabbed his single duffel bag and stepped onto the platform. The station was smaller than he expected, a collection of interconnected domes floating in orbit around a dead planet. Through the observation windows, he could see the gray, lifeless surface below. This was where dragons came from, apparently. Before their sun died and the galactic community rescued the last surviving members of their species. Lucky dragons, Jake thought bitterly. The station administrator met him at the airlock. She was a quillith, a species with 7 arms and skin that shifted colors based on mood. Right now, she was a deep purple that Jake's basic xenobiology training told him meant irritation or disgust. Probably both. Turner, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. Her translator device rendered her chittering speech into flat, emotionless English. I am Vel. You are the 32nd keeper we have requested in the past 2 years. The previous 31 have all resigned, been reassigned, or in one case, requested immediate psychological evaluation. That's not encouraging, Jake said. Vel's color deepened to almost black. The dragons are dying, Turner. Despite having the galaxy's top xenobiologists designing their care protocols, despite unlimited resources, despite everything we know about keeping creatures in captivity, they are wasting away. They refuse to eat. The Galactic Council votes in 30 days on whether to terminate the program and euthanize them as a failed conservation effort. Jake's stomach dropped. Euthanize? They're the last of their species. A fact that makes this all the more tragic, Vel said, leading him down a corridor. But the Council will not pour infinite resources into keeping creatures alive who refuse to live. Your job is simple. Make them eat. Make them thrive. Or at the very least, keep them alive long enough for the Council to see we tried everything. They entered a control room overlooking an enormous habitat dome. Jake pressed his face against the observation glass and felt his breath catch in his throat. The dragons were massive. Even from a distance, even in their obviously weakened state, they were the most magnificent creatures Jake had ever seen. 5 of them occupied the habitat, which was designed to mimic their home world's terrain. Artificial mountains, flowing rivers, thermal vents that belched steam into the controlled atmosphere. The largest dragon lay sprawled across a rocky outcropping, her scales a deep crimson that had faded to dull rust. Her flanks rose and fell with labored breathing. Another, smaller and silver-scaled, perched on a cliff face, staring at nothing. The other 3 were scattered throughout the habitat, all sharing the same listless, defeated posture. The big one is female, Vel said. Approximately 200 standard years old, which is young for their species. The others range from 50 to 180 years. The smallest is there. She pointed to a dragon barely visible in the shadows of a cave entrance. Juvenile. Maybe 40 years. She is deteriorating fastest. Jake watched the small dragon. She was only about the size of Earth's old fighter jets, tiny compared to her companions. As he watched, she shifted slightly and her eyes, bright golden eyes, locked onto his through the observation window. For a moment, Jake could have sworn she was studying him with the same intensity he was studying her. What have the other keepers tried? Jake asked. Vel pulled up a data pad and handed it to him. Everything. The nutritional paste was formulated by the Zenthari Institute, the finest xenobiological research facility in known space. It contains every nutrient, vitamin, and mineral their biology requires. It is, by every scientific measure, the perfect food for dragons. Jake scrolled through the feeding logs. Pages and pages of attempts, all documenting the same result. The dragons would sniff the paste, sometimes taste it, but never eat more than a few mouthfuls. Just enough to keep from starving to death, but not enough to truly live. What did they eat in the wild? Jake asked. Large prey animals native to their world. All extinct now. Vel's colors shifted to a dark blue that Jake didn't recognize. We have tried synthetic meat. We have tried cloned tissue from genetic samples. They show no interest. Can I see the original rescue reports? When they were first brought here. Vel looked at him with what might have been surprise. Most keepers want to start with the recent data. Most keepers failed, Jake pointed out. For the first time, Vel's colors lightened slightly. maybe to a shade that indicated approval or at least less outright contempt. She transferred a massive file to his datapad. Your quarters are in Section 7. You start tomorrow. Try not to make things worse, Turner. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. His quarters were cramped, just a small room with a bed, a desk, and a tiny bathroom. He lay in the dark, thinking about those golden eyes watching him through the glass. The small dragon had looked at him like she was waiting for something. Expecting something. He gave up on sleep around midnight station time and pulled out his datapad. Instead of reading the recent scientific reports, he scrolled back to the original rescue documentation. The reports were 70 years old, written by the first responders who arrived at the dying planet. The descriptions were heartbreaking. A civilization in collapse, desperately trying to save anything they could as their sun expanded into a red giant. The dragons had been found in a massive mountain complex, the last survivors of what had once been thousands. But one phrase kept appearing in the early reports, before the scientific analysis took over. Multiple observers noted that the dragons seemed to be guarding something in the mountain complex. Treasure, one report speculated. Ancient technology suggested another. But whatever it was, it had been lost when the planet's surface became uninhabitable. Jake set down the official reports and did something that probably violated several protocols. He accessed Earth's cultural database. If he was going to understand dragons, maybe he should start with what humans thought they knew about them. He spent the rest of the night reading mythology, folklore, and legends from every human culture. Chinese dragons that brought wisdom and luck. European dragons that hoarded gold and battled knights. Norse dragons that gnawed at the roots of the world tree. American legends of thunderbirds and massive serpents. Different stories, different cultures, but common threads emerged. Dragons weren't just animals. They were intelligent, cunning, powerful. They collected things, treasure, knowledge, challenges. They were rivals, opponents, worthy adversaries that tested heroes and demanded respect. And in almost every story they had to be earned, challenged, engaged. As the station's artificial dawn began to lighten his window, Jake stared at his notes and felt the first stirring of an impossible idea. What if the scientists had been approaching this completely wrong? What if dragons didn't need better nutrition? What if they needed something to hunt? Jake walked into the habitat control room the next morning with a requisition list that made Vel's skin flash through 6 different colors in rapid succession. Live animals? She repeated, her 7 arms gesturing wildly. You want to release live prey into the habitat? Turner, we are a conservation facility, not some barbaric gladiatorial arena. Just hear me out, Jake said, pulling up his datapad. I've been reading the original reports. Every observation of wild dragons mentions them hunting. Not eating, hunting. There's a difference. Dr. Naxos, the head xenobiologist, had been listening from across the control room. He floated over on his species' natural anti-gravity biology, his large eyes fixed on Jake with obvious disdain. We are aware dragons were predators, Mr. Turner. That is why we synthesized their nutritional requirements into an easily digestible paste. It is more efficient, more humane, and scientifically superior to crude predation. Superior for who? Jake shot back. Because it's definitely not working for the dragons. Your credentials show you barely passed basic xenobiology at Academy, Dr. Naxos said coldly. You have been here less than 1 day. We have been studying these creatures for 70 years. What could you possibly know that we do not? Jake felt his face flush, but he stood his ground. I know that every culture on Earth had dragon legends. And yeah, maybe they're just stories, but they all agree on one thing. Dragons don't just eat to survive. They hunt. They challenge. They engage with their prey. Mythology, Dr. Naxos said dismissively. Primitive superstition has no place in modern xenobiology. But Vel had gone very still, her colors settling into a contemplative orange. The council votes in 28 days, Dr. Naxos. At this point, what harm could it do? The harm of abandoning scientific principles for... The creatures are dying, Vel interrupted. Turner, you have 1 week. If there is no improvement, we return to established protocols. Jake spent the next 2 hours arranging for a shipment of nerful beasts, creatures that looked like a cross between earth goats and small antelopes. They were common livestock throughout the galaxy, bred for docility and fast reproduction. Within 6 hours, 24 of them were transported into a holding area adjacent to the dragon habitat. Release them gradually, Jake instructed the automated systems. 4 at a time, spread out across different zones. He watched through the observation windows as the first 4 nerfles materialized in the habitat, their translocation slightly disorienting them. They stumbled, looked around, then began grazing on the engineered vegetation. The dragons noticed immediately. The big crimson female, the one Jake had mentally named Ruby, lifted her head for the first time since he'd arrived. Her nostrils flared. The silver dragon on the cliff face spread wings that hadn't moved in weeks. Even the smallest dragon, the juvenile hiding in the shadows, crept to the edge of her cave entrance. "Come on," Jake whispered. "Remember what you are." Ruby rose to her feet slowly, almost experimentally, as if testing whether her muscles still worked. She watched the Nerfles with an intensity that made Jake's heart race. Then, without warning, she launched herself into the air. Her wings beat powerfully, shaking off weeks of atrophy. She circled once, twice, then dove. The strike was swift and precise. One moment the Nerfle was grazing peacefully. The next it was gone. Ruby landed with her kill, and for the first time in captivity she ate. Not picking at nutritional paste, but truly eating, tearing into fresh meat with obvious satisfaction. Within minutes, the other dragons joined in. The silver one took down 2 Nerfles in quick succession. The middle-sized dragons worked together to corner a 4th. Even the small juvenile managed to catch one, her technique clumsy but effective. The control room erupted in excited chatter. Staff members who had been working on other projects came running to see. Dr. Naxos watched in silence, his expression unreadable. "They are eating," Vel said, her colors cycling through excited yellows and greens. "Turner, they are actually eating." But Jake wasn't celebrating yet. He watched the dragons carefully. Yes, they had eaten. Yes, they had shown more activity than in months. But something was still missing. They had hunted, but it had been too easy. The Nerfles had just stood there, defenseless and confused. In his mythology research, dragons hadn't just hunted rabbits. They had battled knights in armor, fought legendary warriors, faced opponents that challenged them. The hunt was supposed to be difficult, dangerous, worthy of their abilities. Over the next 3 days, Jake continued releasing Nerfles, and the dragons continued eating. Their physical condition improved noticeably. Scales brightened, movements became stronger, eyes cleared. The scientific staff began documenting the changes, cautiously optimistic. But Jake spent those 3 nights in the archives again refining his theory. On the 4th day he submitted a new requisition that made his previous ones look tame. Defense drones. Vel stared at the request. "You want to program defense drones to protect the prey animals?" "The hunt is too easy," Jake explained. "Watch them. They eat, yeah, but there's no enthusiasm. No real engagement. They're going through the motions." "They are eating," Dr. Naxos protested. "That was your goal. You have succeeded. Do not complicate matters with more primitive experiments." "It's not about just eating," Jake insisted. "Look at the behavioral logs. In the wild, dragons faced real challenges. Prey that fought back, terrain that was dangerous, hunts that required strategy. We've given them a shooting gallery." He pulled up video footage from the past few days, slowing it down. "See? Ruby doesn't even use her full speed anymore. The silver one, he's not coordinating with the others like he did at first. They're getting bored again." Vel studied the footage, then looked at the metabolic readings. He is correct. The rate of improvement has plateaued. They are eating enough to stabilize but not thriving. "This is absurd," Dr. Naxos said. "You want to make their food harder to catch? That contradicts every principle of animal welfare." "They're not just animals," Jake said quietly. "That's what we keep getting wrong." He activated a different screen, showing ancient footage from the dragon rescue. "Look at this. The original teams described them as guarding something. Acting with purpose and intelligence. We've treated them like exotic pets for 70 years. What if that's the problem?" The room fell silent. "One more week," Vel finally said. "Implement your defense drones. But Turner, if this fails, we are out of time. The council will not grant extensions." Jake programmed the drones himself, setting them to use non-lethal deterrents. Force fields, sonic pulses, aerial blocking maneuvers. Anything to make the Nerfles harder to catch. The next morning he released 6 Nerfles protected by 3 defense drones. The dragon's reaction was immediate and electric. This wasn't just food anymore. This was a challenge. Ruby coordinated with the silver dragon, using tactics that suggested real intelligence. One would draw the drone's attention while the other struck from an unexpected angle. The mid-sized dragons learned to use the terrain, ambushing from behind artificial rock formations. The juvenile, small and quick, figured out she could slip under the drone's sensor range. And for the first time Jake heard them vocalize. Not roars of aggression, but complex sounds that almost seemed like communication between them. Dr. Naxos watched in stunned silence as the dragons demonstrated problem-solving abilities that weren't supposed to exist in non-sapient species. "Impossible," he whispered. "They are coordinating, strategizing. That level of cognition." Jake smiled. "Yeah, that's what I thought too." The smallest dragon, the juvenile, successfully caught her prey after a 15-minute pursuit that involved aerial acrobatics Jake didn't think were possible. She landed with her kill, looked directly at the observation window where Jake stood, and made a sound that sent chills down his spine. It sounded almost like satisfaction. "Pride even? What are you?" Jake whispered, pressing his hand against the glass. The dragon tilted her head, studying him with those brilliant golden eyes, and Jake knew with absolute certainty that whatever these creatures were, animal wasn't the right word. Not even close. The morning of day 12, Jake stood in the equipment bay, staring at the powered exosuit hanging on its rack. The idea had been bouncing around his head for 3 days now, getting louder and more insistent each time he watched the dragons hunt. They were thriving, no question about it. Their scales had regained their full brilliance. Ruby's crimson hide now gleamed like polished metal. The silver dragon moved with fluid grace through the air. Even the smallest one, the juvenile Jake had started calling Ash because of her dark gray coloring, had put on visible muscle mass. But something still nagged at him. The dragons were hunting, yes. They were eating, definitely. They were healthier than they'd been in years. Yet when he watched them between hunts, he saw them watching the observation windows. Watching him. Like they were waiting for something more. His mythology research kept coming back to the same theme. Dragons didn't just hunt animals. They faced knights. Warriors. Equals who could challenge them, outwit them, push them to be better. Every legend, from every human culture, had dragons engaging with intelligent opponents. "You are insane," Dr. Naxos said flatly when Jake explained his plan. "Certifiably, dangerously insane." "Probably," Jake admitted. "But I'm also right." Vel's colors cycled rapidly between concern and curiosity. "You want to enter the habitat yourself? In an exosuit? And play with them?" "Not play," Jake corrected. "Challenge them. Engage with them as equals. Look at the behavioral data. They're physically healthy now, but their cognitive engagement scores are still declining. They're bored, Vel. We've given them prey, but prey is stupid. Predictable. They need something more." "They could kill you," Dr. Naxos pointed out. "The smallest one weighs more than your exosuit. One bite, one claw swipe, and you are dead. Then I will have to explain to the council why we allowed a keeper to commit suicide by dragon." "The exosuit has shields," Jake said. "And I'm not going to fight them. I'm going to give them a chase. Something that thinks, adapts, challenges them mentally as much as physically." "The council reviews our program in 16 days, Vel said slowly. "If you die, we lose any chance of saving them. But if you are correct and this is what they need." She trailed off, her colors settling into decisive orange. "One attempt. You will have a remote kill switch that teleports you out instantly if anything goes wrong." "Agreed." "Agreed," Jake said before Dr. Naxos could protest further. 2 hours later, Jake stood at the habitat entrance in the bulky exosuit, his heart hammering against his ribs. The suit was designed for hazardous environment work, with powerful thrusters for flight, energy shields for protection, and enough maneuverability to navigate tight spaces. In theory, it could outrun a dragon for short bursts. In theory. "All systems green," the technician's voice came through his helmet. "Shields at maximum. Teleport beacon active. Try not to die, Turner." "Encouraging," Jake muttered. The airlock cycled open and he stepped into the habitat. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Outside the controlled environment of the station, the habitat ran hot, mimicking the dragon's home world. Thermal vents belched steam. The artificial sun beat down from the dome's projectors. Jake engaged the thrusters and lifted off, rising above the rocky terrain. 5 pairs of eyes locked onto him instantly. The dragons had been scattered across the habitat, but now they all turned, focusing on this new element in their environment. Jake could see the curiosity in their body language. Ruby tilted her head, wings half spread. The silver dragon launched into the air for a better view. And Ash, the small juvenile, crouched low on her perch, her whole body quivering with barely contained excitement. "Okay," Jake said to himself. "Here goes nothing." He pulled a cargo drone from the equipment pouch on his suit and activated it. The drone was simple technology used for moving supplies around the station. But Jake had programmed it with evasive maneuvers and tagged it with the same quantum signature the dragons had learned to associate with prey. He launched the drone and sent it racing toward the habitat's canyon system. Ash moved first. She exploded from her perch with a speed that made Jake's breath catch. The young dragon tucked her wings and dove, closing the distance to the drone in seconds. But Jake had anticipated this. He triggered the drone's evasive protocols and it juked left, slipping into a narrow canyon. Ash followed without hesitation, her smaller size letting her navigate the tight space easily. Jake grinned and fired his thrusters, diving after them both. The chase was on. For the next 20 minutes, Jake led Ash on a winding pursuit through the habitat's most challenging terrain. He flew the drone through thermal vents where the heat shimmer made tracking difficult. He sent it skimming across the surface of the artificial lake, forcing Ash to pull up at the last second to avoid the water. He navigated tight corners, vertical climbs, and barrel rolls that pushed both the drone and his piloting skills to their limits. And Ash adapted. That was the incredible part. She didn't just chase blindly. She learned from each failed attempt, adjusted her tactics, anticipated his moves. When Jake sent the drone into a narrow cave system, Ash didn't follow. Instead, she circled around to the exit and waited. Smart girl, Jake thought with a mixture of pride and nervousness. He had to change tactics, using the drone's smaller size to slip through gaps Ash couldn't follow. But the young dragon was relentless. She used the terrain to her advantage, cutting corners by bouncing off cliff faces, using thermal updrafts to gain altitude quickly. In the control room, Dr. Naxos watched with his mouth hanging open. She is problem-solving in real time, adapting strategy, demonstrating spatial reasoning and predictive modeling. This is beyond what we thought possible. The other dragons had joined the observation now, watching Ash's pursuit with obvious interest. Ruby made a low rumbling sound that the habitat's audio sensors picked up clearly. Did she just? Vel started. Encourage her? Dr. Naxos finished. I believe so. Jake was so focused on flying he barely noticed the other dragons. He sent the drone racing along a narrow ridge line, Ash right behind it. The young dragon was breathing hard now, her wings working furiously, but she showed no signs of giving up. Come on, Ash, Jake whispered. You can do this. He led her through one final obstacle course, a series of stone pillars that required precision flying. The drone weaved between them and Ash followed, her wingtips almost brushing the rock. At the last pillar, Jake deliberately slowed the drone just a fraction. Ash struck with perfect precision, her jaws closing around the drone and crushing it in a shower of sparks. The young dragon landed on the pillar, her prize clenched in her teeth and threw her head back. The sound that came out of her wasn't like anything Jake had heard before. It was loud, triumphant, complex. A roar of pure satisfaction and joy. And then something happened that made everyone in the control room freeze. The other 4 dragons responded. Not with random sounds but with what could only be described as answering calls. Different tones, different patterns but clearly deliberate. Clearly communicative. Jake brought his exosuit down slowly, landing on a rock outcropping about 50 feet from where Ash perched with her conquered drone. He was breathing hard, adrenaline still flooding his system. The young dragon turned to look at him directly. For a long moment, human and dragon stared at each other. Then Ash did something that stopped Jake's heart. She lowered her head slightly, in what looked unmistakably like a nod of acknowledgement. Respect even? Jake raised his hand in a small wave. Ash spread her wings, launched into the air, and flew to where the other dragons waited. Jake watched as they gathered around her, making those complex vocalizations, their body language suggesting excitement and approval. They are communicating, Dr. Naxos said in the control room, his voice shaking. Not instinctive calls. Actual complex communication. Vel, we need to revise every classification we have for these creatures. They are not semi-intelligent predators. They are people, Vel finished quietly. They are people. We have been keeping people in a zoo. Jake flew back to the airlock, his mind reeling. When he emerged from the exosuit, he was immediately surrounded by technicians and scientists, all talking at once. But Jake wasn't paying attention. He was staring through the observation window at the 5 dragons, who were now gathered together in what looked like a deliberate meeting. Ruby, the largest, turned her massive head toward the window. Her eyes found Jake's. And Jake understood with absolute clarity that she knew exactly what he'd done. He hadn't just fed them. He hadn't just given them physical challenges. He'd treated them like equals. The question was, what came next? The next morning, Jake was summoned to Vel's office before his shift even started. The urgent tone of the message made his stomach drop. When he arrived, he found the administrator's office packed with people he'd never seen before. Official-looking aliens in formal attire, their various species creating a rainbow of colors and body types around the room. "Turner," Vel said, her skin a nervous pale yellow. "The High Council has arrived early. They wanted to see the program before the scheduled review." An imposing figure stepped forward. It was ancient beyond measure, its crystalline body pulsing with slow, deliberate light. When it spoke, the words seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am Arbiter Ken. I represent the oldest species in the Galactic Council. We have observed your recent activities with great concern." Jake's mouth went dry. "Concern? You have turned a conservation program into a circus," another council member said sharply, a being that looked like floating geometric shapes. "Entertainment. These creatures are endangered, not performers for your amusement." "That's not what I'm doing," Jake protested. "They were dying before." "Silence," Arbiter Ken's voice cut through the room like ice. "We have reviewed the footage. You enter their habitat, you race them, you play games. This is not proper scientific conservation. This is exploitation." Dr. Naxos, who Jake noticed was standing very quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. "Arbiter, if I may. The creature's health has improved significantly under Turner's protocols. Their cognitive function, their physical condition." "We are not debating their current health," Ken interrupted. "We are debating proper methodology. These creatures will be returned to established scientific protocols immediately. No more live prey. No more theatrical performances. They will adapt to nutritional paste as originally intended, or they will prove themselves unable to survive in conservation." Jake felt panic rising in his chest. "You can't do that. They'll stop eating again." They will adapt," Ken said firmly. "Or they will demonstrate that conservation is impossible. You have 48 hours to transition them back to standard feeding protocols. We will observe for 1 standard week. If they do not adapt, the program will be terminated and the creatures will be humanely euthanized." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. "You're going to kill them because they don't want to eat paste?" Jake's voice rose despite himself. "They're thriving. For the first time in 70 years, they're actually thriving. They are thriving through methods that are unsustainable and inappropriate," another council member said. "What happens when you are gone, Turner? When the next keeper does not wish to risk their life playing chase with apex predators? The creatures must be able to survive under standard care protocols, or they cannot be conserved." Arbiter Ken's crystalline body pulsed with finality. "The decision is made. Vel, implement the transition immediately. Turner, you are barred from the habitat until further notice. Security will ensure compliance." The meeting ended. Jake stood frozen as the council members filed out, leaving him alone with Vel and Dr. Naxos. "I am sorry," Vel said quietly, her colors a defeated gray. "I tried to argue our case before they arrived, but the council made their decision before leaving their home worlds." Jake watched through Vel's office window as security drones took up positions around the habitat entrance. Inside the dome, the dragons went about their morning activities, unaware that everything was about to change again. The transition happened fast. The live prey programs were shut down. Defense drones were deactivated. The feeding systems began dispensing nutritional paste at scheduled intervals. Jake watched helplessly from the observation deck as the dragons discovered the paste dispensers. Ruby approached first, sniffed the gray sludge and turned away without tasting it. The others didn't even bother investigating. By the second day, none of them had eaten. Jake spent those 48 hours in the archives, desperate and searching for anything that might help. He pulled up every piece of research, every observation, every scrap of data about dragons in the wild. There had to be something, some argument he could make to the council. That's when he found it, buried in a research note from 60 years ago. A xenoanthropologist named Dr. Chen had studied the ruins on the dragon's home world before it became completely uninhabitable. Her notes described complex structures, art, and what appeared to be written language. "These are not animals," Dr. Chen had written. "The evidence suggests a sophisticated culture, possibly pre-industrial but clearly intelligent. The treasure they guarded was not gold or technology. It was knowledge, libraries, art, the accumulated wisdom of their civilization. When we rescued them, we didn't save animals. We saved refugees. And we've been treating them like pets ever since." The report had been dismissed by the scientific community. Dr. Chen had been labeled as overly sentimental, seeing patterns that weren't there. Her career had ended in obscurity. But Jake stared at the dragons through the observation window and knew she'd been right. On the third day, Jake did something that would probably get him fired. He used his personal communication access to send a message to Earth's cultural database network. He titled it simply, "Help Needed Understanding Dragons." He explained the situation. The creatures dying in captivity. The Council's decision. His theory that they weren't animals but intelligent beings who'd been misunderstood for decades. The response crashed the station's communication servers. Thousands of messages poured in from Earth. Historians, anthropologists, mythology experts, even fantasy writers. All saying variations of the same thing. Dragons in every human culture were never just beasts. They were challenges. Tests. Worthy opponents that demanded respect and engagement. One message stood out from a professor of comparative mythology: "You're asking the wrong question. You're trying to figure out how to make them adapt to captivity. But what if the point is that beings like this can't be kept? What if dignity and autonomy are as essential to their survival as food and water?" When station security came for Jake's communication access, he'd already forwarded everything to Vel and Dr. Naxos. Vel called an emergency meeting with the Council. Jake stood before Arbiter Ken again, this time with printouts of Dr. Chen's old research and data from thousands of human cultural experts. "You want to know why they won't eat paste?" Jake said, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. "It's not about nutrition. It's about dignity. We rescued them from a dying world and put them in a cage. We took away everything that made them who they are and expected them to be grateful." "Sentimental nonsense," one of the Council members scoffed. "They are creatures, not people." "Are they?" Jake pulled up Dr. Chen's photographs of the ruins. "Because this looks like architecture to me. This looks like writing. This looks like art. We didn't save animals. We saved the last survivors of an intelligent species, and then we treated them like zoo exhibits." Arbiter Ken was silent for a long moment, his crystalline body pulsing with slow, thoughtful light. "What do you propose, Turner?" Jake took a deep breath. "Give me one chance. Let me prove they're more than animals. Let me show you what they really are." "How?" "A challenge. A real one. Not me playing chase with them, but something that requires true cooperation. Intelligence. Strategy. Let humans and dragons work together on something difficult. If they can't do it, if they really are just animals acting on instinct, then you'll have your proof that conservation is impossible. But if they can..." Jake paused. "If they can, then we need to completely rethink what we're doing here." "Impossible," Dr. Naxos said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. "The liability alone." "One event," Jake interrupted. "Carefully controlled. With the best pilots humanity can provide. If the dragons fail, I'll accept the Council's decision. But if they succeed, you have to acknowledge what they really are." Arbiter Ken's light pulsed faster now, a sign of intense thought. What form would this challenge take? Jake smiled for the first time in days. "A hunt. The oldest challenge humanity knows. Humans and dragons, working together to accomplish something neither could do alone." The Council chamber fell silent. Finally, Arbiter Ken spoke. "You have 1 week to organize this demonstration. But understand, Turner. If you fail, the program ends immediately. No appeals. No extensions. Those creatures will be euthanized and this station will be decommissioned." "I understand," Jake said. "Then prove it. Prove they are worth saving." The message went out across human space within hours. Jake's call for the best pilots humanity had produced spread like wildfire through military channels, civilian flight schools and racing circuits. The response was overwhelming. By the second day, Jake had over 3,000 applications from humans wanting to participate. Fighter pilots with decades of experience. Racing champions who'd won galactic tournaments. Test pilots who'd flown experimental craft through impossible conditions. All of them wanted one thing: the chance to fly with dragons. Jake sat in the station's small conference room with a selection committee he'd hastily assembled. Vel was there, her colors cycling between anxious purple and hopeful green. Dr. Naxos had volunteered to help, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine scientific curiosity. 3 human military advisors had arrived via fast courier, sent by Earth Command once they'd heard about the challenge. "We need 12, Jake said, scrolling through applications on the main screen. 12 pilots who can think fast, adapt quickly, and work with teammates they've never trained with before." Commander Phillips, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "What exactly are they going to be doing?" "That's the beautiful part," Jake said. "I don't know yet. Not completely. Because it can't just be a human plan. The dragons have to be equal partners in this, not trained animals following our commands. That's insane, one of the other advisors said. You can't coordinate a complex operation without a clear plan. You can if your partners are intelligent enough to adapt in real time, Dr. Naxos interjected quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. I have been reviewing all footage of the dragons since Turner began his unorthodox methods. The cognitive abilities they have displayed, we have been catastrophically wrong about their intelligence level. Over the next 3 days they selected 12 pilots. Not just the best flyers but people who showed creativity, empathy, and the ability to think like partners rather than commanders. Lieutenant Brady, who'd grown up on a farm working with animals. Captain Lisa Torres, a search and rescue specialist used to coordinating with unpredictable variables. A civilian racer named Tommy Chin who'd built his own ship from scrap and won championships through unconventional tactics. The challenge itself took shape through long planning sessions. 6 advanced AI drones, far more sophisticated than anything Jake had used before. They would be programmed with adaptive learning algorithms, making them genuinely difficult to catch. The drones would be scattered across the habitat's most extreme terrain, inside thermal vents, underwater in the deep lake, hidden in cave systems, and racing through the narrow canyons. The goal was simple in concept, brutally difficult in execution: capture all 6 drones. Humans and dragons working together. The humans had technology, strategy, and communication systems. The dragons had speed, strength, and knowledge of the terrain they'd lived in for 70 years. Neither could succeed alone. The Galactic Council arrived in force 2 days before the event. Not just Arbiter Ken but representatives from 40 different species. The media coverage was unprecedented. Every major news network in known space had correspondents at the station. The story had captured imaginations across the galaxy. The last dragons, the crazy human keeper, and one impossible challenge that would decide their fate. Jake barely slept the night before. He stood at the observation window watching the dragons. They knew something was happening. The habitat had been modified with the drone hiding spots, new obstacles, challenging terrain features. Ruby and the others had been exploring the changes, their body language suggesting curiosity rather than distress. Ash, the smallest dragon, flew up to the observation window and hovered there, her golden eyes fixed on Jake through the reinforced glass. She tilted her head, and Jake could swear she was asking him a question. Tomorrow, he said aloud, knowing she couldn't hear him through the vacuum-sealed barrier. Tomorrow we show them what you really are. The morning of the challenge dawned with perfect artificial sunlight streaming through the habitat dome. The 12 human pilots assembled in the equipment bay, checking their exosuits one final time. The suits had been upgraded for this event, faster and more maneuverable than standard models, painted in bright colors so the dragons could easily distinguish between different pilots. Jake addressed them one final time before they entered the habitat. Remember, you're not commanding them. You're working with them. Watch for their signals, adapt to their tactics, and trust that they're smart enough to do the same with you. What if they don't want to work with us? Tommy asked nervously. Then we've already lost, Jake said honestly. But I don't think that's going to happen. The pilots entered through the main airlock in groups of 3, spreading out across the habitat. Jake followed last, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Through his helmet display he could see the other pilots' positions and the locations of the 6 drones. The dragons were waiting. Ruby perched on her favorite outcropping, the other 4 dragons positioned at different points around the habitat. As the humans spread out, the dragons watched with obvious interest. No aggression, no fear. Just intense, intelligent observation. Jake activated the challenge protocol. The 6 drones powered up simultaneously, their quantum signatures lighting up on every pilot's display. Then they scattered, each racing toward its designated hiding spot with AI-driven evasive patterns. For a moment, nobody moved. Humans and dragons all watching, all waiting. Then Ruby roared. It wasn't a sound of anger or challenge. It was complex, layered with different tones. And the other dragons responded immediately, launching into the air and heading in different directions. They're coordinating, Dr. Naxos breathed in the control room. They just divided up the search zones. Jake grinned inside his helmet and fired his thrusters. All pilots follow the dragon's lead. They know this terrain better than we do. What happened over the next 2 hours was something no one who witnessed it would ever forget. The dragons didn't just hunt the drones. They communicated with the humans, using body language and vocalizations that the pilots learned to interpret on the fly. Ruby would circle an area, and the human pilots would understand she'd found something. Ash would make a specific chirping sound that meant she needed help accessing a tight space. The silver dragon, who Jake had started calling Mercury, demonstrated tactical thinking that astounded the observers. When one drone hid in a thermal vent too hot for the exosuits to enter, Mercury didn't just chase it. He positioned himself at one exit while gesturing with his wing for Lieutenant Brady to cover the other. Then he used his fire breath to flush the drone out into Brady's waiting arms. Tommy and the mid-sized dragons worked the underwater drone together. The dragons couldn't dive deep enough, and Tommy's suit couldn't move fast enough in the water. So they created a relay system, with dragons herding the drone toward the surface while Tommy predicted its movements and positioned himself for the intercept. Captain Torres and Ash developed an almost telepathic partnership. The young dragon's smaller size and incredible agility combined with Torres's precision flying created a team that seemed to think as one. When they finally cornered the fastest drone in the canyon system, their coordinated strike was so perfectly timed that the slow-motion replay would later be used in flight academies across human space. The sixth and final drone was the hardest. It had hidden itself in a cave system with multiple exits, using its AI to constantly relocate. It took combined human technology to track its quantum signature and dragon knowledge of the cave layout to predict its movements. Ruby and Jake led the final assault, with the big dragon using her massive presence to block escape routes while Jake's smaller suit could navigate the tight passages. When Jake's hand finally closed around the last drone, the habitat erupted in sound. All 5 dragons roared in triumph, their voices creating a harmony that sent chills down every spine in the control room. The human pilots hooped and cheered, their voices crackling over the communication channels. Jake emerged from the cave to find Ruby waiting for him. The massive dragon lowered her head to his level, her intelligent eyes meeting his. Slowly, deliberately, Jake raised his hand. Ruby extended one claw and gently touched his palm. The gesture lasted only a second, but every camera caught it. Human and dragon, equals acknowledging each other's worth. The observation deck where the Galactic Council watched was completely silent. The celebration that followed was something the station had never seen. Jake had arranged for a feast, using the station's entire food synthesis capacity to create dishes from 100 different species cuisines. But he'd saved something special for the dragons. As the dignitaries and media gathered in the observation areas, Jake activated a holographic system he'd spent his personal credits to install. The habitat dome filled with images from Earth's history, stories of dragons from every human culture. The dragons watched, transfixed, as humanity's oldest legends unfolded before them. Chinese dragons bringing wisdom and prosperity. European dragons as noble adversaries to brave knights. Native American tales of great serpents and thunderbirds. Stories that showed dragons not as monsters, but as beings of power and intelligence worthy of respect. Ruby approached the holographic display, her massive head tilted as she watched a projection of a medieval knight facing a dragon not in hatred, but in mutual challenge and respect. Then she did something that made the entire galaxy hold its breath. She vocalized a long, complex pattern of sounds. Dr. Naxxus's translation algorithms worked furiously, cross-referencing with the linguistic patterns they'd observed over the past weeks. The translation appeared on screens throughout the station. Finally, you remember who we are. Arbiter Ken's crystalline body pulsed with rapid, intense light. In the council chamber, the representatives erupted in debate. Some argued it was just sophisticated animal behavior. But others, particularly the older species who'd seen civilizations rise and fall, recognized something deeper. Jake removed his helmet and stood before the council, exhausted but resolute. They're not animals. They never were. They're people. We didn't rescue pets from a dying world. We rescued refugees. Survivors of a lost civilization. And we've been keeping them in a zoo, treating them like exotic creatures, when they deserve to be treated as equals. The implications are staggering, one council member said. If they are truly sapient, then our entire conservation framework is inadequate. They would need rights, representation, cultural accommodation. They would need freedom, Jake interrupted. Or at least as much as we can give them while helping them survive. Arbiter Ken was silent for a long time. Then, the dragons have proven they possess intelligence, complex communication, and the ability to cooperate with other species as equals. The conservation program will continue, but it will be redesigned completely. Not as a captive breeding program, but as a cultural preservation and integration initiative. He turned his ancient gaze to Jake. Turner, you are hereby appointed director of the Dragon Cultural Exchange Program. Your mission is to help these beings recover not just their population, but their civilization, their dignity, their place in the galaxy as people, not animals. Jake looked through the observation window at the 5 dragons gathered together, watching the holographic stories of their legendary counterparts on Earth. Ash caught his eye and made a small, cheerful chirp. "I accept," Jake said. "But on one condition. I'm not their keeper anymore. I'm their friend. And friends don't keep friends in cages." "What do you propose?" Jake smiled. "We start by asking them what they want. For 70 years, we've been deciding for them. Maybe it's time we actually listened." 3 months later, Jake stood in the redesigned habitat, which was no longer called a habitat at all. It was now the Dragon Cultural Center, and it looked completely different. The observation windows had been replaced with communication portals. The feeding systems had been removed in favor of hunting grounds that the dragons managed themselves. And most importantly, the locks on the airlocks had been changed. The dragons could leave whenever they wanted. Ruby approached him that morning, moving with the confident grace of a being who finally knew her own worth. She lowered her great head, and Jake reached up to rest his hand on her scaled snout. "You ready for today?" he asked. Ruby made a sound that he'd learned meant affirmative. Today, the first class of xenolinguists would arrive to begin the long process of developing a true shared language with the dragons. Not commands or training, but actual conversation between species. As Jake walked back toward the airlock, Ash swooped down and buzzed him playfully, the young dragon's way of saying hello. He laughed and watched her soar back to join the others. He'd come to this station with one simple job: feed the dragons. He'd ended up giving them something much more important. He'd given them back themselves. And in return, they taught the galaxy a lesson it desperately needed to learn: that intelligence and dignity aren't determined by technology or civilization. Sometimes they're just waiting to be recognized, respected, and given the chance to flourish. The dragons were finally home. Not because they'd returned to their dead planet, but because they'd finally found people who saw them for what they truly were. Not beasts to be tamed, but equals to be honored.